Okay, thank you for your introduction, Hiro. And then again, thank you for inviting me to give a chance to talk about our studies in our laboratory. Today, I'm going to talk about human cognitive biases in relation to the role of dopamine. And before doing that, I would like to introduce what we are doing in our lab. We are more focused on the neural basis of clinical symptoms such as cognitive impairments, delusion, illusion, and depression. And we also do several studies associated with it to understand the problems in society, such as age-related dysfunctions. For instance, car accidents in elderly subjects. And we also conduct studies for the aim of scientific interest, such as cognitive biases, consciousness, self-recursion, embodied perception, placebo effect, and quantum cognition. For methodology, we use cognitive tasks together with eye tracking, EEG, fMRI, and PET. And today, my talk is more focused on cognitive biases, and then the methodology is about PET. It's because in cognitive neuroscience, there are tremendous studies using fMRI, and then many cognitive functions have been revealed in terms of neural activations, which brain regions and brain networks, and so on. However, and there is a still unknown association between the neurotransmitters and the neural activation. Neurotransmitters is important indeed because it sets the brain functional architecture, which then sets the stage for cognition. Today, I'm going to introduce how we can apply PET imaging into cognitive neuroscience. Indeed, the PET has low temporal resolution compared to fMRI. For instance, we have to have a subject to lay down inside the scanner like 60 minutes, or sometimes 2 hours to obtain one data from each subject. For instance, if we use a radioligand, carbon-11 SCH23390, which is an antagonist on dopamine D1 receptors, it takes 60 minutes to obtain D1 receptor availability in Striatal. Therefore, using PET, it is not suitable to study dynamic changes of function, but it is more suitable to study individual differences. Today, I'm going to show our studies that integrated the different levels of brain functions to understand the cognitive biases in humans. Okay, sorry.
Makiko, we can't hear you. What's happening?
Oh, sorry, I muted.
Sorry. I said it was muted. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, can you start from this slide?
Yes. The term cognitive bias was first introduced by Tversky and Kahneman in early 1970s to describe people's systematic but purportedly flawed patterns of responses to judgment and decision problems.
Il m'a dit que chez GTX, ils n'ont pas mal utilisé. Il a pas mal utilisé. De quoi?
Since then, there are tremendous psychological, economic, and social science studies to reveal what type of cognitive bias humans have. And as a result, there are many human bias, cognitive bias in human. It shows that 188 biases here. And so that you cannot see what type of cognitive bias present in this slide. This can be obtained in the website. So if you are interested, you can take a look in the website. So when Tversky and Kahneman have talked about the cognitive bias, they talked about irrational decision making. But there are some cognitive biases that has a more adaptive aspect in terms of mental hygiene. Today, I will talk about more about the second, the latter aspect, such as mental health related cognitive biases. But we have done some studies regarding irrational decision making associated with dopamine, conducted former researcher in our research center, Dr. Takahashi. I'm going to introduce his study for a bit. Here, there are two choices: sure payoff and gamble. And we ask a subject which choice they prefer. One sure payoff indicates it is guaranteed that subjects gain this amount of money. In the case of gamble, it's 50% chance of winning to gain this amount of money. And then probability and the amount of money is changed for many times. And then each time subjects asked to choose which choice they prefer. And by doing this decision making, behavioral economic studies have revealed that subjects overestimate low probability of winning, but underestimate high probability of winning. If you are a rational thinker, it's going to be linear, but in many cases, it's going to be inverted S-shaped curve. And then in our study, we looked how this cognitive bias is associated with function of dopamine. We looked at the D1 receptor and the D2 receptors. They have different roles in cognition and also in terms of the dopamine release. Burst firing produces phasic dopamine release, which mainly activates postsynaptic D1 receptors, whereas slow irregular firing produces baseline DA release, which mainly activates postsynaptic D2 receptors. Phasic activity facilitates cue reward association, acquisition and incentive salience, whereas tonic activity is involved in response inhibition and behavioral flexibility. And we scanned subjects. For one group, we scanned the D1 receptors using this ligand. And in another group, we measured the D2 receptor availability in striatum using carbon-11 lacropride, which is an antagonist on dopamine D2 receptors. And we have examined which D1 receptors and D2 receptors are associated with this nonlinearity. And it was found that those subjects who have a stronger S-curve, indicating less indicated by the below the low scores of vertical number is associated with low D1 availability in striatum. but we didn't find a correlation between nonlinearity and the D2 receptors. Therefore, in this study, it was found that this type of cognitive bias is more associated with reward sensitivity. Therefore, D1 receptor is more associated with the type of this cognitive bias, not D2 receptors. And then I'm going to more focused on the mental health and cognitive biases. Here, I'm showing a study conducted in Mobert. Each subject was body scanned, and experimenter created an avatar for each subject, as shown in this top figure. And then they created the avatar to get fatter. If it gets to right word, it's getting fatter and fatter. If it goes to the left side, the avatar gets slimmer. And subjects observe each avatar and decide if the avatar is real of themselves or not. And it was found that there are a lot of distortion regardless of BMI of subject. Even subjects are fat people or slim people, they observe themselves slimmer than the actual themselves. So this study indicates distortion in self-perception. But in case of others avatars, they didn't show this type of bias. In social psychology, actually, there are many studies indicating we have a skewed self-recognition. We tend to judge ourselves as being above average on intelligence, desirable traits, and so on. For instance, the study conducted by Cross indicated that 94% of college professors evaluated themselves as being above average in teaching abilities. So this is unlikely to happen, called superiority illusion. This happens when we compare ourselves with others. We put ourselves a little bit better than average. Superiority illusion is actually regarded as a basic element of human motivation to meet the need for self-esteem, such as we want to be respected by others. Traditionally, it was once thought that a realistic view of oneself is important for healthy mind. However, in 1988, Taylor and Brown revealed that healthy mind has three positive illusions, which include superiority illusion regarding self-evaluation, optimism bias regarding future events, and illusion control regarding behavioral causality. These are commonly showing that our unrealistic favorable attitude toward ourselves. Although this is illusion and unrealistic, it's been shown that it motivates our future goals and promotes for mental health. And one study indicated that optimism bias is related to depression. Those people who have low depression, they show optimistic bias. But mildly depressed people have no bias. Sometimes it's called depressive realism. If depression gets severe, they show pessimistic bias. This is important for mental health, but it should not be extreme, but it should be moderate level. Because if it's extreme level of illusion, we tend to underestimate risks, such as decreased prevention behavior or increased reckless behavior. So sometimes it's said that we have to learn to think negatively. This is not new a feature of human. Actually, in the ancient Greek alphabets, non-thyself was inscribed in the forecourt of Temple of Apollo at Delphi as a lesson to our ignorance about ourselves. In anthropology, optimism has been regarded as being the central to the process of human evolution and regarded as an important feature to the welfare of communities. And in 2011, the computation simulation was showing that the positive illusion is evolutionary advantageous and maximize individual fitness. Therefore, this indicates the superiority illusion is a normal human condition and which has to have the neurobiological mechanism. And we are focusing dopamine, and there are several pharmacological behavioral studies conducted by Charlotte indicating dopamine is important for optimistic bias. If we increase the level of dopamine, expectations of pleasure and optimistic bias is enhanced. Here now we have questions to be addressed. What about superiority illusion? What about individual variability? And then we want to quantify the dopamine in specific brain site because using the pharmacological intervention cannot specify how much the dopamine worked in the brain and then which brain sites. Therefore, we are using the PET to specify the dopamine receptors in specific brain sites, and also we are looking for functional connectivities in resting state fMRI. In order to test the degree of superiority illusion, we used socially desirable and undesirable words. We present the word on screen, each, and we ask subject to put themselves how much above or how much below average, like this. And we calculate the distance from the average, like this. And sorry, this is Japanese words, but this is indicating that most people put themselves above average for nice characteristics. But for negative words, they put themselves below average, indicating we all believe that we are more modest, generous, kind, and popular than others. And there is an individual differences, and we found that this is all Japanese sample, and then about 80% of us have this illusion. This is in accordance with previous reports obtained from Western culture. And the right figure indicates negative correlation with the tendency to have depression. The vertical axis indicates Beck hopelessness scale, which is one of a depressive measure. If you subject have a high hopelessness, they tend to have diminished superiority illusion. But there is no correlation with IQ. And it's also interesting that we tend to have a stronger illusion when we get aged. Actually, there are some studies some studies indicating positive illusion is associated with longevity. A study of nuns indicated that number of positive words in diaries written during their 20 and 30 ages influenced if they are alive after 60 years. And another study of HIV patients revealed positive thinking influenced life expectancy. In this study, we are focusing on D2 receptors. In previous PET study, it's been reported that subjects with lower D2 receptor availability in striatum rated themselves as highly socially desirable in questionnaire. And as I have shown in previous slide, Charlotte's study indicated levodopa increased positive expectations and optimistic bias. And in case of patients with addiction, they show low D2 receptor availability in striatum, which is associated with impaired inhibitor control of impulsivity. This is indicating addicted people and control subjects D2 receptor availability. Cocaine and alcohol and obese people are food addicted, and these addicted people have less D2 receptors in striatum. It's possibly because overstimulation of D2 receptors induced downregulation in post-synapse. And the studies indicating that these addicted people have impaired inhibitory control of impulsivity. Therefore, we scanned subjects using PET to obtain D2 receptor availability in striatum using workup light. And those subjects were also scanned resting state of MRI, and we performed path analysis, and we revealed that low dopamine D2 binding potential or availability is associated with weaker functional connectivity between striatum and SEC, which associated with higher superiority illusion, whereas high D2 binding potential is associated with stronger connectivity between ACC and striatum, which is associated with low superiority illusion. This network is known for cognitive control and error detection network, and therefore we are assuming that this type of error or superiority illusion is not suppressed or inhibited in case of low D2 binding potential, as in addicted people. And also, what does it mean about the D2 receptors and the relation with dopamine release? And we conducted in previously to see the association between dopamine synthesis rate and dopamine D2 receptor binding, and we found inverse relationship between them. Therefore, it indicates that low dopamine D2 binding potential indicates increased level of dopamine. High dopamine D2 binding potential indicates decreased level of dopamine. Therefore, increased dopamine indicates a weaker connectivity, which increases superiority illusions, but reduced dopamine induces stronger connectivity, which induces or suppress superiority illusion. This is more about the specific brain network, but then we have conducted the whole brain network analysis to see which brain networks or functional connectivity is indeed associated with superiority illusion. And then we found that the machine learning based feature selection algorithms identified the set of 15 functional connectivities as being most relevant in superiority illusion. And one of functional connectivity, as shown here, putamen and dorsal intercingulate, is the one we have previously reported in PNS paper. But there are other regions and the cortical regions are involved. And we found that the weighted linear summation of their respective correlation of functional connectivities indices were reliably predicted one's level of superiority illusion if it's higher or lower. In the discovery set of data obtained from 123 subjects using Siemens scanner, in this data set, leave one out cross validation indicated that the accuracy of 72.4% to identify high or low superiority illusion. This classification schema was generalized to independent data set obtained from 36 healthy adults scanned by GE with the accuracy of 72.2%, which are pretty good estimation. And we further tested if we can predict individuals' dopamine D2 availability by the 15 functional connectivities in the superiority illusion classifier. And then as shown here, measured dopamine D2 receptors, which was normalized in vertical axis and in horizontal axis, predicted dopamine receptors availability from 15 functional connectivities. And this is positively correlated, and then it was successful in predicting individuals' availability of D2 receptors in striatum. And this robustness was also further confirmed by the permutation test. Okay, so next, I would like to talk about something about unconscious level. Because superiority illusion is consciously asking subjects to rate themselves, but what about unconscious self-recognition is associated with superiority illusion? And in previous study, using the questionnaire of self-esteem, the studies have found that the conscious self-esteem and implicit self-esteem is dissociated. And if implicit self-esteem is higher than conscious self-esteem, the subject gets depressive. So we performed the implicit association test. This is like this. So subjects were asked to categorize the centrally presented word. This is I, to either left or right side. In case of left figure, subject decide this I is corresponding to left side self. And sometimes they the words present like the words were others something like they, or the word desirable and undesirable words are presented also. And each time subjects categorize each word to left or to right by pressing the buttons as fast as possible. And this condition, self and undesirable is the same side. But in this condition, desirable and self isn't the same side. In these two conditions, the word presented in the centrally is exactly the same and the subjects are doing the same thing, but the reaction time is faster for this condition, which is desirable and self is the same side. By calculating how fast the subject reacted for this desirable and self category is in the same side, indicates the degree of implicit self-esteem. And we have calculated the discrepancy between explicit superiority illusion and the implicit self-esteem in the horizontal axis. Larger number indicates higher implicit self-esteem compared to explicit superiority illusion. And those subjects have low small wordness in brain network. Therefore, larger discrepancies associated with decreased small word function network or reduced segregation of function network. And we also searched for ROI that are associated with this discrepancy, and we found the visual media region was important for this discrepancy. And going back to the findings obtained from machine learning study, actually we have found that the cortical region, such as occipital pole, occipital cortex, corneal cortex, are associated with superiority illusion. And in this another study, again, we found that the visual media region is somehow associated with the superiority illusion. So in the next study, this is behavioral study, but we tested if superiority illusion is associated with the strength of visual illusion. We applied the Ponzo illusion. In one condition, there is a depth Q, but the other condition, there is no Q. Subjects were asked to judge the size of two circles, left one and right one, if they are same or different. And then they answer the confidence level of their judgments. And we calculated D prime using signal detection theory. And we have plotted, this is no depth Q and a depth Q. And then as D prime decreases, they are full, they have a more stronger illusion. And we subtracted these two D prime scores for each subject, and we plotted in the vertical here. And we see the correlation, we did the correlation analysis and found that the superiority illusion and the Ponzo illusion is positively correlated. So those people who have stronger, higher superiority illusion have a stronger Ponzo illusion. And we then tested which personality trait items of superiority illusion contributed to Ponzo illusion using the machine learning model presented here. And we found that 21 items of superiority illusion was associated with the contribute to Ponzo illusion. And as shown in the left plot here, vertical axis indicates the predicted Ponzo illusion from these 21 items, and it it fits with the actually measured upon the illusion. So therefore, we have found that the behaviorally superiority illusion and Ponzo illusion are related to each other. And next, we have tested if visual illusion is associated with the dopamine in the brain. And this time, we used adaptation method. So first, we show subject high saturation image like this, and then show the middle one. And then low saturation, and then middle one again. These two middle saturation images are physically same, but subjectively perceived differently. The last one, which was shown after low saturation, is a little bit vivid than the one which was presented after high saturation. This is confirmed by behavioral scores, and we did this test inside fMRI. Subjects perceive each pictures, and we have looked which brain regions are associated with the subjective differences in the brain. And we found that frontal region and parietal regions activations associated with the subjective differences in perception. And then this individual differences of brain activation was associated with D2 receptor availability in striatum. In previous pharmacological studies, by increasing dopamine using a drug, it induces visual distortion. Therefore, there are several evidences that dopamine is important for visual perception. And in case of Parkinson's disease, there is several reports showing impaired color perception, which can be reversed by treatment with levodopa by increasing dopamine. And using the PET, we could figure out the striatal dopamine D2 receptors are indeed associated with visual illusions of this type. So far, I have shown that PET is useful to find the underlying neurotransmitters of brain activations or networks of specific cognitive biases. But these are all about correlations, and we need to test the causality. And we can use neurofeedback, as many other studies are using fMRI, or we can do a pharmacological approach or neuromodulation approach using TMS-TDCS. So I'm showing that if we can change cognitive biases using first neurofeedback and then regarding talking about pharmacological approach. So here there is a glass of water. How do you perceive this? Half empty or half full? If you are pessimistic, you say half empty. And if it's optimistic, it's gonna be half full. And this is indicating the same thing is differently perceived individually. And then we have tested similar, with this similar idea, we have prepared the stimuli by morphing between sad and happy faces like this. Happy faces is getting sadder. We have morphed happy face and sad faces, and we created ambiguous face, 50% of each. And then we have tested inside the scanner how subjects perceive this ambiguous face and which brain regions are associated with their decision. And we have found that those people who, when subjects perceive the ambiguous face pessimistically or perceiving this ambiguous face as sad, ACC activation is increased. High activation is associated with pessimistic perception, and lower activation is associated with optimistic perception. So if we can decrease this activity, we may be able to make subjects' perception toward optimistic way. This is still ongoing, but I'm presenting preliminary results here, obtained from 27 participants. We did a neurofeedback training to decrease the activity of ACC. This is double blind, and we have another subject who are trained to decrease the inferior parietal sulcus activation. But we don't know which subjects we are training inside the scanner. This is double blind. And so far, we have found that ACC activation was controlled by ACC training group, but not IPS training group after 4 days of training. Here, it indicates the change of cognitive bias using the same face perception test of ambiguous emotion. ACC trained group showed more positive judgment of ambiguous faces, whereas IPS trained group did not show the difference between before and after training. Also, we tested the depression score and found that the ACC trained group became less depressive after training. And in another study I'm going to introduce is the usage of Mazindol drug, which is a catecholamine reuptake inhibitor that binds to dopamine transporter in pre-synapse and block dopamine reuptake. In case of placebo, dopamine is dopamine transporter reuptake dopamine in synapse. But in case of Mazindol, it blocks, so dopamine increases in synapse. And in these two conditions, we inject raclopride, which binds to dopamine D2 receptors. And compared to placebo, in the condition of Mazindol, raclopride does not bind as much as placebo condition. And how change raclopride binds indicates how much dopamine increased in striatal. And this is the actual data obtained from our subject. And we have tested if this influences on our subjective feeling or conscious feelings, and also superiority illusion. we have found that increased level of dopamine in striatum was associated with enhancement of OSE scores, which is a subscore of consciousness scale. Sorry. This indicates an enhanced sense of mysterious experience in a positive way, including grandeur. And also we found that increased level of dopamine in striatum enhanced superiority illusion. Okay. So I have shown that the underlying neurotransmitters of brain activation networks of cognitive biases using PET, which is difficult to access usually for cognitive neuroscience. And we found that dopamine is coloring our subjective reality, not just ourselves, but also of outside world, which are emerging from specific neuroactivations networks revealed by fMRI. Therefore, dopamine may play a key role both for cognitive biases and visual illusion, which may be bridging between them or not. In this way, this is has a clinical implication because it helps to establish the specific pharmacological intervention for specific cognitive functional abnormality in psychiatry. Okay. This is all I have for today regarding the cognitive bias. And then actually, our group is researching many other stuff like consciousness, self, and recursion, and metacognition, QST, which is in collaboration with Hero and Receptor. And hopefully we can report in future meeting regarding about our collaboration. And this is all I have today. Thank you very much.